Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of What's New in Data. I'm really excited about our guest today. We have Nicola Askham, who is the data governance coach. Nicola, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. You have so many great insights on data governance and making it accessible for folks who follow along with your work. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself and what you worked on in the past and what you're passionate about.
So I'm very passionate about data governance. So hence the brand of the data governance coach. So what I do is mainly these days I'm much more into the coaching and training people, giving them the capability to do data governance themselves. I do a little bit of consulting, but in the past I have been a consultant doing the interim data governance lead or data governance manager. I actually made it up as I went along when I worked for a very large British bank many years ago. So I've been doing data governance 21 years now. And to begin with, I didn't even know what it was called. I was just talking to people about roles and responsibilities around data and trying to find out who cared about the quality of the data. Because apart from me and a small number of other people, I was really struggling to find out who cared. So it was really hard in the early days. And I think that's what I became quite passionate about, is that I felt somebody should care about the data. I don't think I explained it very well in the early days, but I think my passion was very clear, and that lent people to talk to me, and I eventually started doing what I wanted them to do. And then I discovered that there was a name for what I did, and it was called data governance.
Excellent. And from your experience, you're certainly an expert, and it's great to hear that there was a time earlier in your career where you felt like it was harder to explain just because of where we were, but now you found a lot of great ways to simplify it. I want to get your take on the current state of data governance with all the other parts of the data ecosystem right now.
Mm. I think it's a really great time to be doing data governance. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the last 21 years have been a really great time to be doing it. But I think in the first half or even more of that, it's been really hard, and it's been only really possible to do it for most organizations that were regulated. So financial services, pharmaceuticals. But what I found that the current state is a really exciting time because everybody's very excited in things like Gen AI, and everybody wants Gen AI. And I think they're slowly, or perhaps even quicker than we originally hoped, coming to the realization that your data has to be good enough for you to get the results you want from Gen AI. And that starts with data governance. We have to understand what data it is that we're going to feed our models, and we have to know that it's good enough quality. And so I think it's something I've been talking about probably for the last 18 months since Gen AI really exploded. But I'm really seeing that it's been picked up everywhere. And I went to a massive Gartner data analytics conference in London a few weeks ago. And that was kind of AI and Gen AI was kind of mentioned in nearly every presentation. But they were also making this big thing that your data has to be AI ready. And, so I just spent the whole time grinning because I was just thinking, this is really good. This is, some really serious people are now saying this. So I think we're in very exciting times. And talking to some of my clients, I think they've been really trying hard to get data governance initiatives going for a long time. But suddenly there's an interest in it because people didn't want to do data governance for data governance sake. And fair, I can get that. But there's a real tie to something that is fast paced, fast moving, and people want some off so they don't get left behind. And it's really made them suddenly interested in their data.
Yeah, you had a really great point about for AI starts with really good data, else you're going to get issues with hallucinations and customer experiences where, the AI might think you're someone else or you have a different problem than what the customer originally came to you for. And the other part of this is, data privacy, data security, like who has access to what data, who can copy that data, how is that data going to propagate to other consumers, right? There's all these open questions and pitfalls there. And I want to understand from you, where are most data teams struggling with data governance right now?
I think we've probably got two things that I'm seeing quite a lot at the moment. So, one, picking up on what you're saying, is the how does data governance provide almost like that framework for everything else to sit on when it comes to AI? Because you say there's so many facets of it. And I'm leaning very much from my own conversations with people is that AI governance should probably be a subset of data governance. So I think data governance already has a good network. It already knows it has to be aligned with data privacy and data security. These are teams that all work well together. And I think if we could put AI governance as a subset of data governance, I think that would really help. I think some organizations I've spoken to have done that quite naturally. Others are kind of saying, back off data governance people. We just want to get on with playing with the fun technology kind of thing. But I think the one that has been around since I've been doing data governance and still is the people. And I think this is something that always surprises people, that data governance, particularly in the early stages, is more about the people than it is about the data,
Mm.
because the data doesn't deliberately make itself wrong. That's the people. And the users not understanding why they have to check that it's the right data before they use it, or why it's important to enter it in a certain format. So, and I think that the people side of it is often overlooked. And I think people are still, that's still a core problem that people struggle with, as well as the newer ones that they're facing.
I'm in 100% agreement with you. I always say it's the people, not the pipelines, because it really does take some level of intuition and understanding of the business that you're operating in, and being able to execute there. Uh, Else, you're just moving data around from one thing to another, and you can generate a bunch of reports, but are those reports valuable? That doesn't happen unless the people making the report really understand kind of the vision of the company and its goals. You know,
Absolutely.
so let's say you start working with a team and they're struggling with data governance. What's your foundational advice that you give them just to start things off?
So I think over the years, I've kind of worked out that, as far as I'm concerned, there are like 6 principles for being successful when it comes to data governance. And I think the first one that I definitely missed in the early days, so I would never criticize somebody else for missing it, was the understanding why you're doing data governance in the first place. So look at the opportunities that it brings to your organization. What business value does it deliver? And of course, some of that's going to be regulatory requirements, ticking that box. But there's so much more around, profit, eh, cost reduction, efficiencies, customer service, supporting innovative things like Gen AI, but that's not the only thing that we do with our data. So I think people just want to dive in and be where I was 21 years ago and go, we should make all our data perfect and live happily ever after. And that's not going to sell it to anybody. We've got to understand what's in it for your organization. So I like to call that the opportunity. I then think so many people just don't have the capability when they start doing data governance. And it's the same as exactly what happened to me. I'd worked for the bank for many years. I started doing data governance, genuinely making it up as I went along. These days, people have a bit more resources available to them to look at. But people then say to me, well, how do you know what this is? We know you. You've been in the bank for years. How do you know what this data governance thing is? And I've seen my clients have that time and time again. Personally, I think it worked better if somebody who understands the organization leads the data governance initiative, but that means they don't know data governance. So I always think that making sure you really understand what you're doing, get some training, that kind of thing is really important. The next one I always call custom build. There are some standard data governance frameworks on the internet. I can't pretend they don't exist. But I always say to my clients, they weren't designed for your organization. To be fair, they weren't designed for any specific organization. They're just theory. And you might look at them for inspiration. If you've never done anything like this before, that's probably a good idea. But I've seen a lot of people make mistakes by copying and pasting a standard framework, then wondering why it doesn't work for their organization. When I've worked in a number of sectors where I've worked with multiple companies in the same sector, and have never had exactly the same data governance framework yes, there's always some components that are similar, but how we actually do it has got to be bespoke to your organization for it to work. So I think that is key. Next, I would say simplicity. I really know that so many people like to overcomplicate data governance. And I think if we want to get around this people challenge that we already spoke about, we absolutely got to make what we're doing simple. The one thing that I always like to say when I'm trying to get people to understand that is think about our coffees and how we do coffees. And so it links with a custom build as well, is that, you know, these days we can order coffee that is specific to us. So at the moment, I can't tolerate caffeine and I can't tolerate dairy, which doesn't make very much for great coffee drinking. But this morning I went out and I had a decaffeinated oat milk latte, and that was perfect for me. Didn't make me ill, made me feel like I was having a coffee like thing this morning. So that's really, really great. But it's when the people then start saying, and they want 101 other things, and you see the people in the queue in front of you coming up with this hugely complicated order. What we want is something that's right for our organization, but it's also simple so that people can get their head around it. I mean, I even think my current coffee is quite a mouthful, but we need to make sure that this is simple, that business are not off put by it. It has to be something they can get their heads around. Then the last two are really simple principles. I like to say you have to launch your data governance framework. It is so, it never ceases to amaze me. I have calls with people who say, can you help? I've been at this organization 6 months, a year. I've designed this perfect data governance framework. And I've even reviewed some and they don't look bad, but they've not actually done anything with it. They've emailed it out and said, there you go, John, that's the data governance framework. Go and do it. And you go, well, what's this? So we really have to implement it. We need to do some concrete action to actually do it, not just email out a link to here's our new data governance teams channel or whatever. We've really got to make the effort and actually make this happen. And then the other thing that I always like to remind people of is you have to constantly evolve your data governance framework. I mean, don't mean every week or every month, but your organization is changing. So your data governance framework needs to evolve and change. So the AI governance is a really good example of that. So a data governance framework I designed last year, year before, would not have had any capacity or mention of AI governance. But the ones that I'm working on with my clients now are, and I hope the clients that I helped design things last year are now going, we need to work out if we're taking on AI governance and evolve our framework. So don't ever forget, it's not once and done. You have to keep evolving and changing it. So yeah, a bit of a rattle through of 6 principles that I like to share with people.
Yes, it's great the way you frame these 6 principles. It's very actionable for teams that need to implement data governance. And I wanted to drill into the first one, which is, looking at the opportunity, because I'm a big proponent of, finding opportunities in a business rather than, just thinking about problems and backlog and
Yeah.
debt. So when teams are on that journey of looking for data governance opportunities to improve their current workflows, how do they go about that?
Well, I think there's probably 2 ways I'd recommend. So it depends on, the level. So one is let's go really senior and look at your corporate strategy. What is your organization trying to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years? And then either you might know because you work with data in your organization, or do some research, talk to people, find out, is your data currently good enough to meet all those objectives in that strategy? And that's a way to really find those opportunities to talk about with senior stakeholders, because they're going to be responsible for delivering part of those strategic objectives and goals. And if you can then say, I can help you do that because did you know your data's not good enough to do that at the moment? That's really, really, really powerful. And then the other way to do it is to solve some real problems, some real pains. So this is perhaps more of a bottom up approach. And I think you need to do both. And for that, we actually had to talk to the people that are working with the data, using it, trying to make it work. And that can be everybody from like the data engineers trying to get data pipeline to just general consumers of the data, the business intelligence teams trying to provide insights on this data. Go and ask them, what problems do they have? Can they not source the data? Is it not good enough quality? Is it duplicated when they get it? And I think when you find those, that's a really good use case to start solving problems, because I definitely did it. And I see far too many other people repeating my historic mistakes of saying, let's just make everything perfect and we'll live happily ever after. And that's not, we've got to be solving real problems and delivering real value for our organization. Otherwise, nobody will want to do this.
Absolutely. Now, let's say those opportunities have been identified. What are some practical ways to start implementing data governance within an organization?
Well, my favorite one is, we've got to work out, one, we've got to get people thinking about data, and we've got to try and find some senior stakeholders to perhaps be accountable for some data set. So one of my favorite things to do is to create conceptual data models. Now, I'm not a very good data model at all. I can do very simple, very high level conceptual data model. I don't always even call them that for our business users. Don't necessarily need to train them on how to do data modeling, but I like to get some, a senior stakeholder from a function, let's say finance, and ask them to come along and bring some of their subject matter experts about data along to the workshop. And I get them to brainstorm what data they use and produce in that area. So we start building, I sometimes call it a map rather than the conceptual data model because it makes them feel more comfortable. But we start getting an understanding of what data they use and produce. And from my point of view, I get them to start thinking about data as separate from the systems in which it resides on. Because business people love this conflation of data with the systems it's on. And I like to start saying to them, you're not allowed to write any systems names on this diagram. This is all the data. I want to know what data you use, what data do you produce. And it's during those kind of workshops that really aren't very long that people start thinking about data as perhaps an entity in its own right that they've not thought about before. They start telling you some of these problems. And you can also start saying to people, so, who do you think should own this data? Now, if I just met you for the first time today and said, oh, John, I think you own such and such data, you might go, whoa, who are you? Why are you telling me I own data? But if you've just spent 90 minutes going through a workshop and I say, is there any of this data on this form, on this diagram we've drawn that you wouldn't want anybody else in this organization making decisions on? The chances are you'll go, oh yeah, that, and that, definitely mine. You've just agreed to be a data owner, but I haven't done all the, I haven't scared you off with anything yet. I've just made you want to do it. So that's one of my favorite ways to start, because it really starts people engaging and they start talking to you about the issues they have with the data during that. And you can start to build that relationship and start to work out what you're going to prioritize, because we can't do data governance over everything in a big bang approach. We're always going to have to do phases. So getting this overview of what's going on with data in our organization at a very high level is a really great way to work out where are we going to focus for our first few phases.
Yeah, that's excellent. Such a great way to get started. The data governance roadmap really can start with teams thinking that they're doing data governance, but they're really just doing role-based access control. Like every database and data warehouses has role-based access control, or you can define like who gets access to what tables. But that's really like a technical way of looking at it and very kind of narrow in its scope. So going from that to something that's enterprise and company-wide and, truly data governance, it sounds like it's a journey. And like you said, there's two ways you can go, bottoms up, which is looking at it from like the technical implementer standpoint, and then top down, which is more enterprise and strategic to the executives.
Absolutely. You probably have to do a bit of both to be successful. We need to, and then just hope we meet in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the things in the data governance industry that are exciting to you right now?
I think, it's a kind of double-sided coin of excitement and scary, but it is the Gen AI, because I think that it really has the potential to speed up some of the perhaps laborious things that, perhaps where mistakes get made because they're boring and people don't want to do them. So I think it could speed up things. So like no code data quality checks. So the business users can say, this is how I know my data is good enough to use, and provide a business rule. Whereas without that kind of technology, we have a team of analysts writing SQL and trying to work out that business rule into code. And then we try it, and then we give the report or the results to the business who go, well, that's not an exception. And then we have to go through this iterative process. So I think we've got the potential for AI to really help with tasks like that. And I think that's really good. But I think the flip side of that is that it's equally scary that people think AI can do all of data governance for them. And, you and I know we need that human context, that human understanding. Some vendor at a conference a few months ago very proudly told me that we don't need any business interaction, that their tool just replaces data quality tools and tells you whether the data is good enough. And I said, well, how does it know? And it said, because it knows whether it's changed. And I went, but what if it was wrong in the first place? And I think you're now going to tell me that it's wrong because it wasn't right in the first place, and I've now changed it. And I think in the end, from discussing it with this chap, I think we both agreed that perhaps his tool was doing data observability rather than data quality. So I think there's this great potential to take some of the mundane, repetitive tasks to really add some value by automating them. But I think we've got to really make sure we don't let our business users get totally carried away and think that the machines can do everything for us and get it right. We need that human context for what really is this data, what really does make it good enough and bad enough. So we need that context.
Absolutely. I don't doubt AI's capabilities to tell us about data and metadata, but I 100% am skeptical that it's going to actually tell you the real things you need to know about that data to make it useful for analytics and insights internally. Because, yeah, there's always a story as to why, data is represented in a certain way in some table, and, there's some notes and some asterisk like, hey, well, this column you can't exactly, I know it says, lead score, but it's actually deprecated and we don't use that anymore. Like, there's always some,
Yeah.
corner cases that real organizational data teams have to think about. And you need that, like you said, that human touch, that human context to really know how to action and organize that data.
Mhm. I've seen so many problems that have been reported as data quality issues over the year that were not data quality issues. The wrong data had been chosen because the name looked like it would be the right thing, but exactly like your example, users were using it slightly differently, or, we don't use that code anymore. So we just put some useful information in this field instead. And they were getting really bizarre results. And it was because the data was not what it ostensibly was labeled as.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always going to require a lot of human intervention. I think there's a lot of opportunities for AI to make humans more productive and do more with less, which is great. You know, I the people who have been using AI for a long time now will even double down on that view and say, yes, you need a human in the loop because AI by itself can, make the wrong decision from data, and you ultimately don't want to be liable for something that, AI is just doing on autopilot for you.
Oh, definitely not you. That's when you would start getting even more of the like AI horror stories that we've come across already.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Nicola, where can people follow along with your work?
So the best place is probably my website, which is just nicolaaskham.com. Follow me on LinkedIn as well. I also have a podcast myself. So if
Amazing.
anybody wants to learn, and we only discuss data governance on it, I'm afraid, but it's called the Data Governance Podcast. If anybody does have an interest in it and wants to find out more.
Excellent. Nicola Askham, the data governance coach with the Data Governance Podcast. Thank you so much for joining today's episode of What's New in Data. For all the listeners, those resources that Nicola mentioned will be down in the show notes. And Nicola, thank you so much for joining today. And thank you to the listeners for tuning in.
Thank you for having me as a guest.